Hello everyone. In this session, we're going to discuss Docker. What is a Docker? And here we try to understand why Docker needs and when we need to use Docker concept and why Docker concept comes into the picture. So we try to understand the complete Docker concept from the scratch. Okay, we start very scratch. Why Docker is required. Guys, when you are working in a project, you are developing suppose any application. When you're developing any application, in application development, if you talk about application development, in the application development is nothing, is a collection of program. Just what is a software project we can say? Any software you can call as a collection of program. Collection of program, collection of program is called as software project. We can call as a software project. Software project, actually, when you're developing a software project contains several components. Software actually, when you're developing any software, software project contains, guys, contains several components. It contains several components. It contains several components. Just like in software, first component we can say like front-end component. Yes, no. In software development, maybe front-end component, back-end component, back-end components, back components, and third one is the database component. So there are several components may be available. Back-end component, and database components. So suppose you have developed any software. Let's check here in the software. Yes, no? There are these components you have required. This is a front-end component, back-end component, and database component. So you can check here, guys. Here, let's suppose. So you have required one front-end component. Suppose this is my front-end component and UI component, which contain UI part of your project. Suppose this is a UI component, and this component we can call as a front-end component. Front-end component. And now we have one back-end component. This is a back-end component, suppose. Under your back-end component, you can have multiple components, just like you have some web component, you can have business component, and you have persistence component, business component which contain business logic for your project, persistence component which contain persistence logic for your component, like web components. We have web components. And now we can have like business component, business components. We have business components. So there are several components. Yes, no. When you are working with a project can have multiple components, persistent component. And now your backend component may be integrated with your database component. So you have one component like database component, and database component is integrated with your backend component. So backend component is interacting with your database component, and front-end component is interacting with your backend component. So this is called as a backend component, and now this is a UI component. Okay, very important point. When you're developing the UI component, suppose there are several technology you are using, HTML using, suppose when you're using front-end component developing, HTML, CSS you are using, and then you're using Bootstrap, then you're using maybe chance you're using Angular, you're using jQuery. So suppose these are technology that you have required to develop front-end component. And when you're developing the backend component, suppose you're using Java, yes, no, Java, which version you are using? Suppose 1.8 version you are working. Suppose you are using Spring Boot, which version you are using? Suppose you are using 2 point version you are using. And there might by chance you are using Hibernate, suppose you are using 5.6 version Hibernate. And when you are working with an database in backend, suppose you are using MySQL database. And suppose we are using which database version we are using in my project 8.5. So understand here, guys, actually when you are working in a project, what challenges you can face? Because when you are working in a project, there is a multiple component. Yes, no, just like front end component, back end component, yes, no, and then database component. And you are using several technology to develop front-end component. You are using several technology to develop back-end component. You are using several and some database technology to develop database. So developer actually what does is no support developer develop the code. After developing the code, important point, yes, no, you need to understand one more. After developing the code, developer develop the code. And the technology in your project, which technology you are using, which version you are using. Suppose you are using Java 1.8 version. Using Java 8, you are developing the project, which means you have used the Java 8 project. Okay. After that, after developing that project, yes, no, you need to push your code in your repository. And there might be chance you need to run your project in different environment. Just like suppose I need to run our project in one dev environment. In your you can run, there might be chance because when you're working in real-time project, your project needs to run in multiple environment, like in dev environment, set environment, UAT environment. There are multiple environment is there, and there you need to run your project. You need to run your project in multiple environment, like production environment. Production environment is the real-time environment where you're running your application. So suppose you run your application, there might be chance you need to run your application in development environment, and each environment is a separate machine, guys. That is important point. This is a separate machine, and each machine can have separate configuration. Suppose this is a UAT environment, and here there is a separate configuration. Yes, no, this is a separate machine, and this is suppose pilot environment. This is a pilot environment. There is a separate environment where you need to run your project. And when you're running your project, in your project, that is important point, yes, no, so you required Linux machine, yes, no, Linux required, and you required Java 8, yes, no, Java 8 version required. You required Spring Boot required, and you required MySQL 8.5 version you required. 8.5. So these are software, these are technology, yes, no, dependencies that you required when you're running your application in any environment. So there are suppose several environment. Environment means like separate machine, separate configuration will be there maybe. Okay, if you want to run same project with this, yes, no, software here also, and now you need to run in this environment also, and now you need to run in this environment. To run your project in different environment, you required, yes, no, these are configuration. You required Java, you required Spring Boot, you required MySQL 8.5 version. Okay, guys, suppose when you're going to run your application in dev environment, so suppose there is a Java 11 is available. Which version is available? Java 11. Yes, no? And you required at least 1.85. And there might be chance when you're going to run in set environment, there is no Java software is available. Might be chance because this is a separate machine, and you're trying to run your application in that machine where Java is not available. Can you run? No, you can't run. You will face the problem. And suppose in UAT environment you try to run where Java 13 is available. Okay, you are able to run here. And suppose in pilot environment you are trying to run, there is no configuration is available, there is no Java available. And now here your production environment Java, you want to run your application, but here in this machine you have Java 1.6, but you require at least which version? 1.8. Actually, when you want to run your application, when you deploy your application in machine, we need a setup, all the environment which required to our application. To run our application, whatever setup we have required, whatever setup is required, we need all those software and setup in all the environment. So before going to run your application, suppose my application, my project required this setup and this software to run your project in all the environment. So before going to run your project into different environment, you need to make sure where you have such type all the required software for our application in that environment or not. If you don't have, then you're not able to run it. So it means you need to face one big challenge before testing your application, running your application in any environment. You need to set up the configuration in the software that are required to run our application in that environment. So earlier we are facing this big challenge, guys. So what challenge we are facing? Suppose in order to deploy our application in a machine, we need we need to set up all the software. We need to set up all the software. We need to set up all the software which are required to our application, So it means first of all, we need to set up all the software that required to run our application, like OS required, operating system, Java, which version you require to run your application, MySQL, which version is required to run your application, Tomcat server is required, which version is required, so etc. You need to set up. So in real time, what happened? Project, yes, no, in real time, actually project should be deployed. In real time, project should be deployed into multiple environment for testing purpose. In real time, we need to run our project in multiple environment for testing purpose, like dev environment, jet environment, yes, no, UAT environment, and then pilot environment. Like there are several environment, yes, no, environment will be set up based on project requirement. So in dev environment, yes, no, dev environment, actually this environment will be used by basically by developer. Developer using this environment to test and run your application to perform in integration, yes, no, integration testing. So this environment mainly used by the developer, integration testing. And now set environment, we can say set environment will be used by testing team, testing team to test functionality of the application, to test the functionality of the application. And UAT, yes, no, UAT environment will be used by client to test the functionality of application, functionality functionality of the application. Yeah, so UAT environment, yes, no, used by the client to test functionality of the application. Here we have pilot environment, we can say. There are several environment, means pre-production testing. Okay, before, yes, no, launching your application for production environment, if you want to, before production, if you want to test, so then you can use pilot environment. So in real time, actually the application needs to run into multiple environment. We have production environment. So production environment means live environment. Actually, production environment we can call as a live environment, and actually this environment is called as a live environment where you are going to deliver a project. So we can say it is a live environment. So once you deploy your application in a production environment, that is called as a now you have live your application. So here you have seen, yes, no, actually uh, you have seen this diagram also. When you run your application in different environment, what you require, you need to set up software configuration in different environment. So to deploy, to deploy application to these many environment, yes, no, man, environment, to deploy this application to this many environment. So to deploy application to these many environments, we need to take, guys, of all the softwares that required to run our application in all environment. So here you can check it. If you want to deploy your application, to deploy your application to these many environment, we need to take care of all the software required to run our application in all environment. So it means before running your application, first we need to take care whether that all the software that are required to run our application in that environment is available, in that machine is available or not. So it is a very difficult task. Suppose you want to run your application in hundred of machine. So it means in all 100 machine you need to check, yes, no, all the required software are available in that machine that you have required to run your application. So that is a very difficult task actually to handling. In real time, yes, no, you need to run your application in multiple environment. Then if you are it is a become very difficult challenge uh, to set up all the required software in all environment. So then how we can overcome this problem? Actually, to run your application, whatever dependencies, whatever configuration, whatever environment required in your machine. So first of all, you need required set up all those software a machine in that machine in which you want to run your project. Suppose you want to run your project in 100 of machine. So in the all 100 machine, first of all, you need to require all that setup. Yes, no, that is required to run your application. Suppose if you want to test in 100 machine, so it means in all 100 machine, you require to configure all the configuration and setup required software that are required to run your application. It becomes very difficult and challenging task. To overcome this problem, the concept is come, guys, Docker. Docker, why Docker is come? Let's understand what is a Docker. So we can overcome this challenge using which concept? That is Docker. So Docker comes into the picture to overcome this problem. So we can overcome this problem using that concept that is a Docker. Okay. Earlier, guys, what is a Docker? We will discuss in detail. But before Docker, let's we understand one more concept, virtualization. Earlier, guys, suppose if you want to run your application, yeah, you want to install multiple operating system in the same machine, then how you can install? Then you can install, yes, no, multiple operating system in the same machine using the concept of that, guys, we can say that concept is called virtualization. Okay, here you can check, guys, what is a virtualization? virtualization versus containerization. Let's check here first of all what is a virtualization. And here you can check here what is a virtualization. If you open this picture and you can check here and you can easily understand what is a virtualization and what is a containerization. Okay, so let's now we copy this image and let's now we try to understand what is a virtualization. Now here you can check it. So we have this image, yes, no, you can check here. If you check this image, you check this image. So in this image you can check here. Okay, let's here you can check here. So if you want to install multiple operating system in your one machine, what you need to do? Suppose first of you require your processor, then you install it on operating system, and then you for virtualization you require one virtualization software that is called hypervisor. You can use hypervisor for virtualization, and in this OS actually in this machine we have two, suppose three OS. One OS is a main OS. Main OS is called as a suppose main OS. Suppose we have Windows OS. Suppose we have Windows OS, and that OS we can call as a host OS, guys. Which OS? Host OS. And suppose this is a Windows OS. This is called host OS. And in this OS, you can check that we have created one virtualization, and now we have installed one more OS, and in under that OS we install running our application, and this OS is called as a guest OS. Now we have installed one more OS. This is another OS, and this is a one more OS. Okay, in the same machine, yes, no, how many OS you installing? That is three guest OS and one host OS. It means in one host machine, you have installed three guest OS. But suppose if you're installing three OS and where you're running three different application, but challenge is actually in the same machine when you're installing multiple OS, your machine performance degraded. Your machine is not responding properly. Your performance may be decreased. But okay, if you are using containerization concept, what is the containerization? So we will discuss in detail, but check here. In case of containerization, you have host machine operating system. Okay, if you want to create a container, then you can install one software that is a container engine. That is called as a Docker engine. Just like for virtualization, you are using hypervisor. For containerization, you are using Docker engine. So Docker engine actually you can check here. Whatever actually Docker engine allows to create one container just like a isolated environment will provide that are required to run your application. So you can check here without installing yes no multiple operating system you can create multiple container to run your application in the same host machine. So in this way, you can, yes, no, your performance may not decreases. Otherwise, your performance may be decreased. Your performance may decrease. So in this way, we can resolve problem. So containerization basically is the most modern approach to run your application in isolated environment. Actually, this container will manage everything that you have required to run your application. And now you can run multiple container on the same host operating system. So earlier we are using approach virtualization, but now we are using containerization. So let's understand what difference between virtualization, virtualization and containerization. Virtualization. So virtualization means installing, we can say installing multiple guest operating system in one host operating system, host operating system, in one host operating system. So what is a virtualization? Yeah, virtualization is nothing we can say. Virtualization means installing multiple guest operating system in one host operating system, that is called as a virtualization. Virtualization means when we are trying to install in multiple guest operating system in one host operating system, it's called as a virtualization. For virtualization, we are using hypervisor software. Yes, no? Hypervisor is the software that you can use for virtualization. Hypervisor will be used to achieve this. And now we need, yes, no, we need to install all the required, all the required softwares in host operating system to run our application. So virtualization, we can say it is the old technique. So now no one is using. Earlier we are using the virtualization to run the application. So virtualization is the old technique. Here system performance, yes, no, system performance will become slow if you are using virtualization concepts. So in case of virtualization, there might be chance system process will be slow in this process. So system process will become slow in this process. To overcome this problem, yes, no, to overcome the problems of virtualization, virtualization, we are going for containerization, containerization concept. We are going to use containerization concept. So we are going to use containerization concept. So virtualization means installing multiple guest operating system in one host operating system. For virtualization, we are using hypervisor software. And virtualization is an old technique. And using virtualization, system performance may be decreased. To overcome this virtualization, we are going to use the containerization concept. Okay, what is a containerization? Containerization. So let's understand what is a containerization. Containerization, guys, basically, what means of containerization? Actually, you have seen earlier in this diagram, actually to run your application, whatever software, whatever dependencies, yes, no, is required, it will pack all these things into one package. So just like containerization basically used to package all the software and your application code in one container for your execution. Just like I have created one your container, yes, no? Just like you can think in this way, guys. We have this big ship. In this big ship, yes, no? We have multiple container. Okay, under that container, any person who want to live inside that container. So whatever thing is required to surviving for that person inside that container will be available. And now we have another container. So all the things, yes, no, that is required to surviving other person inside container are wrapped, are packed. So just like container, what that? It will package all the software and application code in one container for your running application. So containerization basically what does? Containerization basically used to package all software and application code in one container. So we can say it is used to package all the softwares and application code in one container for execution. So container basically helps to package all the software and application code in one container for execution. Container basically now will take care, yes, no? Container will take care for everything. Container will take care everything which is required. Container will take care of everything which is required, to run our application. To run our application, whatever thing is required, container will take care. Earlier, you have seen when you want to run your application in multiple environment, you need to take care all the software, all the configuration that are available in that environment machine are not. You are installing manually. You are managing manually. But now you're not required to manage those things. Who will manage? Container will manage. So container will take care of everything which is required to run your application. It means if you want to run your application in multiple environment, no need to take care, yes, no, in that environment, whether required software, required configuration is there in that environment or not. So who will take care? Now containers will take care. So what is the use of containerization? Containerization basically used to package all the software and application code in one container for execution. Container will take care of everything which is required to run our application. So we can run the containers, right? We can run the containers we can run the containers in multiple machines in multiple machine easily. But how we can containerize application, guys? Yes, no? You need to containerize your application. How we can containerize your application? Because containerize application means container will package all the required software and application in one container for your execution. So to containerize your application, we are using the Docker. Docker is we can say, what is a Docker? Docker is nothing. We can say Docker is a containerization software. It is a containerization software. So what is a Docker? If someone is asking, what is a Docker? Docker is a containerization software. Using Docker, what you can do, guys? Using Docker, we can create container for our application. If you want to create a container for your application using Docker, you can create a container for your application. So we can say using Docker software, we will create, we will create container for our application. So for our application, we can create a container. So what is the use of Docker? Docker actually is a containerization software, and using Docker, we can create container for our application. Okay, you can check here. If you go to the Google, you can check here. If you type just like what is a Docker and press enter, you can read here what is a Docker. Docker is a platform designed, just note, to help developer build and share and run container application. It means this is a software for containerize your application. You can check, it will package the software that is called as a container. So you can create application. Yes, no, you can create container for your application using Docker. Okay. So you can run your Docker container in multiple machine, and then Docker container basically contain all the required software that is required to run your application in any environment. So no need to take care for you. So you have not need to take care. Okay, check here. Suppose guys you have one application with Docker. Let's how you can use. Suppose I have one application with Docker. So you have one application with your Docker. Let me create one diagram and you can easily understand. Suppose application with Docker. Yes, no? So I have created one application with Docker. Okay, whatever application you have created, yes, no? With Docker, you can, if you want to run your application in different environment, don't pass your application directly in any environment. First, what you need to do, you need to create one image of that application. Which image? Docker image. Okay, what is a Docker image? No worry, I will discuss in detail. But just understand here, if you want to run your application now, so first you can create one Docker image of your application. And now, once you create image for your application, Docker image, and then you want to run your application in which machine? Suppose we have multiple machine 1, machine 2, and machine 3. So in any machine, when here you want to run, so suppose you want to run in this machine 1, machine 2, machine, suppose 1, this is a machine 1, and this is a machine 2, machine 2, and this machine 3, machine 3. And now in machine 1 and machine. Now you can run this Docker image in any machine. So when you run this Docker image in any machine, that is called the Docker container. So running image means creating a container. So you can create Docker container. You can run your Docker container. So now Docker container actually package all the required software and configuration that are required to run your application. So now earlier, suppose you want to run your application in 100 of machine. Before running your application, you need to take care which software, which version is required, what configuration is required to run your application. So first of all, yes, no, you need to set up that configuration and environment in that machine, and then later on you able to run your application in that machine. But now we can overcome that problem using Dockerization, using containerization concept. We can create a container and we can run a container in any machine without taking care what software, what configuration is required to run your application in any machine. Because container basically what is? Container package all software code, all the software libraries dependency that are required to run your application. So that is the advantage of the Docker, and that's why Docker is comes into the picture, because earlier, yes, no, the development team is facing a big challenges, because suppose you are running your application, suppose you are running Java application in your machine. In your machine you have Java 8 and you are using Java 8 concept, but suppose same application you pass to someone and the person trying to run application in his or her machine, in their machine, then there might be chance, suppose in their machine Java we have 5 and we have tried to run that application is not running, is showing error. So we are giving some time why, yes, no, this application is not running. So then developer 2 is complaining, developer 1, yes, your application is not running. There is some issue, there is some challenges. Then developer 1 again start to rectify where is the challenge. And then after analysis find, oh, you have just this Java version or not. Oh, you don't have. So it means here you are wasting time only for your software configuration. So now you no need to take care, yes, no, whatever software configuration and whatever software is required to run your application, you can manage using the containerization. You can create container. Container basically what does? Container basically used to package all the software and application in one container for execution. So let's guys, what is the conclusion of your Docker? So what is a Docker? We can say Docker is a containerization software. I hope it's clear what is a containerization. Containerization software. So Docker is a containerization software. And Docker guys, now we can say Docker will take care of application and application dependencies, whatever dependencies required for your execution, whatever dependencies required, Docker will take care. And Docker, yes, no, deployment into multiple environments now become easier, yes, no, will become easy if we use if we use Docker container concept. If you are using Docker container concept, then deployment become easier in multiple environment. So that's why we are using Docker concept. So Docker is nothing. Docker is a containerization software. What is a containerization? Containerization basically used to package all the software and application code into one container for execution. So you can create containerized application and you can run your containerized application in multiple environment. So this is the Docker. I hope it's clear. Thank you.